looks like the room's filling up and it is time to kick off. So I think we'll get started. So before we kick off, I just wanted to thank everybody, obviously, for coming. This is the first cyber lounge we've done in 2021. So last year we ran a series of events. It was packed with a lot of different learns, a lot of value from the cyber community. And it was headed by some very, very influential names in cybersecurity as well. One of which is today's speaker, which is Paul Barker. Hi, Paul.
Hey, Baron.
So today, Paul's going to be covering a topic called the human factor in cybersecurity and discussing how a lot of people believe that it's the weakest element, while some people believe it's the greatest element. So importantly, he'll be covering how we can mitigate the risks of the human factors to ensure that it works for us, essentially. If you've attended, I'm not sure how many of you are first timers. I did try and ask that earlier on, but if you've attended any of the lounge events before, you'll know that we do have a Q&A section towards the end. So if you've got any questions throughout Paul's talk, please enter them into the text box and we'll try and cover each and every question towards the end of the talk. So I think everybody's here now. So I'll pass it over to you, Paul.
Thanks very much indeed. And thank you all for taking the time out to join us today. I thought I'd try and keep it, fairly informal today. So I've got my cup of coffee for the Cyber Lounge. And I thought we'd just have a chat through. And I think, after that introduction, I think it's just worth saying that, my main objective here is not, it's not a crystal ball. It's not to issue an edict on this is how people should do it. It's really about starting conversations and making conversations happen and progress and get people talking about wider thought processes than perhaps are typical within the space. So as was introduced, we're going to explore some of the reasons why threats continue to be so effective and try and look at different ways or additional ways you can shore up your defenses. But first, let's kick off by looking at the context. And I just say I'm grateful that I've got a coffee rather than a Dr. Pepper that one of the participants is doing. So otherwise you might be getting this at 200 miles an hour. So let's just think about where we sit today. If you just look at breaches, clearly what we've been doing and what we're doing today isn't working. The statistics, whichever survey you look at, time and time again, we're still seeing headlines, ransomware. We're still seeing phishing as very effective. Now we've got vishing and smishing as well to go onto that. So whatever we've done so far isn't working well enough. So therefore, there is a legitimate time to step back from the front line and just ask ourselves a little bit about why might that be? What else could we do differently? Secondly, I think there's a little bit of a factor of the emperor's new clothes. Certainly for boards, management teams, what they're seeing is very high spends in the cybersecurity area. So, what we've got to educate people on is that just because you've got a large budget doesn't equal increased protection necessarily, okay? Because there's an awful lot of ways to spend money and there's an awful lot of vendors who'll pump solutions to you in the marketplace, that do this, that do that supposedly do everything. But it doesn't necessarily mean that just because we're spending so much money, the organization is actually protected from the threats and the vulnerabilities within our own organization. So it's just something to bear in mind. That follows on to technical solution proliferation. There's a slide that sticks with me from one of the Cyber Lounge presentations that I saw last year, where the speaker literally put up a slide and there must have been 200 different vendors logos on this, and it was divided into boxes for the type of solutions that they provide. But utterly spoiled for choice. You know, there isn't anywhere you can move. My inbox is pinging daily with vendors saying, have you thought about this? If you're not protected by this, this is what you need. It's very hard sell. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't necessarily link it back to your enterprise architecture. So what are the conflicts that having all of these different systems? Are they, some of them actually tripping each other up? Are they actually reducing their efficacy because one is doing something that another one, you know, you've got a lot of overlap? And the other part of this, which really needs to be thought about, particularly with a view to the sort of operational resilience sort of legislation that's coming in if you're a financial services company this year, but if you're not, we're still living in a VUCA world, a very volatile and uncertain world. So you need to be thinking about your organizational resilience and your operational resilience. And it's about that third-party security. If you're involving 20, 30, 40 different vendors in your cybersecurity defenses, that's 30, 40, 50 sets of third-party monitoring you've got to do. And for a risk manager, that's quite a headache. So again, technical solution proliferation, yes, it's getting us great advances in terms of technical ability and capability, but also there is a flip side, and we just need to be thinking about that. And more importantly, we need to be talking about that with our colleagues, particularly our risk management and our leadership colleagues. Data privacy, we've all kind of recovered, you know, from the initial wave of effort and work that went into things like GDPR. Certainly if you're European or UK related, you'd be very aware of GDPR. That sort of went quiet for a while, but now it's coming back. In 2020, the ICO levied fines ranging from 48 euros to 35 million euros, okay? So that's the first year, or the first time since the legislation has come into force, that we've actually seen some really meaty fines coming out. So roll that forward, you can guarantee that there aren't going to be many more 48 euro fines going out. They're going to be targeting the bigger numbers. So whereas there was a bit of leeway and a bit of time on GDPR, not the case anymore. Then overall, threat vectors evolving rapidly. I'm a fan of The Mandalorian, so you know, whoop with joy when Luke Skywalker, you know, appeared in the last episode of the second series. Apologies if you haven't seen it because I've just spoiled it for you, but it's been enough over the media enough. But you know, there's something about these deep fakes, and when they're used for social engineering, that the power of these, one, there's a sense of inoculation because we get used to seeing them. We get so used to seeing these deep fakes. When they moved in the, you know, in the commercial or the corporate world rather than entertainment, you know, what's to say that there isn't a video from your CEO, there isn't a video from your head of security who's telling you one thing. Now, especially as we're starting to use more social feed type productivity tools, so Slack, Teams, where there's a lot more exchange of videos, Giphies, you know, all this sort of stuff, where it's a much more social media feel. It's very easy for these social engineered threats to be just dropped into that, and over time it's just an incremental thing. So again, just something to be aware of. And just, there are other things, but for me those are some really key ones that I think it's worth thinking more about. So we've got all these breaches, but why are they continuing to be so effective? Especially when we've got all of these tools, as we've talked about, all of these systems, all of these software solutions at hand. Well, the unintentional insider still remains the most significant single point of failure. Humans, the weakest point of any system. Okay, there's an acronym called PICNIC, which is problem in chair, not in computer. And I think that's absolutely true here, that for all the whistles and bells and shiny toys and applications and systems and things with a padlock on them, or a knight in armor, or any of these other sort of super cyber graphics that get used to sell systems, you've still got a person sitting in a chair pressing buttons, and some of the buttons that they can press can be potentially damaging to the organization. We talked about it a little before, but you've also got to ask yourself the question, again, coming back to the architecture, is your architecture driving some of these human failures? What do I mean by that? Well, if your systems are so complicated to use, if you've got to jump through so many hurdles to get an encrypted email out, are people developing workarounds? Are they trying to find, the shortest route between A and B, which may not be through C, D, and E that you've written down in your policy and that you expect them to follow? If there is an easier way to do it, that'll be the way that on the ground people are doing it. So you've got to think systemically and structurally within your organization. Do your levels of approval, is your management hierarchy, are all these things harming your ability to have an effective system? So again, not typically something that all cybersecurity programs will look at, because it's more of the overall business side. But again, we keep getting these breaches, so we need to think a little bit more differently. And then finally, just to reiterate, if all these significant budgets that we've got, if we're spending those all on the shiny tech, and we're not worrying about the users and the way that they're behaving, the way that they think, and the culture that they are operating within, you've spent all this money, you've applied all these tools, but have you really closed the vulnerability? So I want to just move on now to just quickly look at, what I call the part that everybody does. So technical solutions, okay, because this is where there's a lot of choice, but also a lot of focus and a lot of effort. So here's a little list. Regularly updating antivirus software, using only trusted and secure connections, including Wi-Fi, updating existing software, awareness of physical surroundings to prevent shoulder surfing, and reporting suspicious behavior, keeping up to date with current threats, maintaining a list of trusted sites and services, ensuring passwords are strong enough, and limiting the amount of personal information being shared online. Now, there's a list of fairly common technical solutions that I imagine most organizations have incorporated within their cybersecurity policies. Interestingly, though, that list comes from 2014. It's actually from Coventry et al., written in 2014. So here we are in 2021, and yet those same things remain problems for us. We haven't solved them in 6-7 years. So again, it's worth noting of why is that? Why are we still having to tell people about updating their software, updating antivirus? We've got to look inwards rather than always looking outwards and always looking at the perpetrator, okay, which we have to do. It's absolutely vital. We've got to keep pace with the way that cyber criminals are working, but equally, we've got to be looking inside our own shop just to make sure that we're on top of everything we can. So what else can we be doing? I want to break it down today to a simple equation that works on the human factor. And that equation is collaboration plus communication equals cooperation, right? It's meant to be catchy. It's meant to be easy to remember, but there is value in the keep it simple, stupid mantra, if you like, because these are things that can resonate. So collaboration plus communication equals cooperation. And as I said, this isn't the matrix. This isn't a red pill or a blue pill. This is just simply an opinion to drive some thinking and see what people can do with this information and take it on back in their organizations. So let's look at each of those elements in turn. Collaboration. Collaboration, perhaps some might feel this is an unfair generalization, but within the cybersecurity world, playing well with others has never necessarily been top of the tree. There's an awful lot of hubris. There's an awful lot of ego. There's an awful lot of people, playing top trumps with their qualifications and certifications, using excessive jargon to demonstrate just how technical and how much of an engineer they are, and effectively talking a language that nobody else understands. Okay, we can't afford to do that anymore. Okay, our cybersecurity people are humans as well. You have to behave like humans. Okay, so I think it's just something we've got to accept, that outside of the cybersecurity world, there is an ignorance about the level of risk attached to the assets people are responsible for and the behavior that could be putting those same assets at risk. Okay, we just have to accept that. Okay, and that's a starting point. And there's an onus on the security professional not to lord it over the ordinary employee or the ordinary user by showing, oh, we'll leave that to me, let me show you how much I've got, or how much I know. It's about how can you transfer that knowledge, how can you transfer those behaviors to other people. So it's about developing your situational awareness. Okay, you've got to put yourself in their shoes. Now, again, I've already mentioned this briefly. We're very good at putting ourselves in the shoes of the perpetrator. Okay, so we've got a lot more proactive threat detection. We've got a lot more people who are out in the deep web and the dark net doing searches, looking for people, laying traps, all this sort of stuff. So we're getting to try and understand the psyche of the perpetrator, of the cyber criminal, but also put yourself in the shoes of the non-technical average user who doesn't really care whether it's system X or system Y or version 12 or version 14. They've got their own business objectives that they're trying to focus on, and they just want the computer to work when they switch it on. They want the email to send when they do it. They want the document to be stored, or they don't want the document to be shared with a client. So we need to understand the drivers and motivations of other people in the business, and not just sitting there tutting and being frustrated because everyone's not doing what we tell them to do. Some of that situational awareness is also, from here. I'm talking to you today from my home office, and I'm sure most of you, or many of you, will be in your home offices, and very few of you will actually be in a corporate office location. Okay, so we need to understand that it's different now. We need to understand that things haven't caught up, and we need to understand that people are more responsible for their IT, because you can't just ring up the help desk and say, why is my Wi-Fi not working? Because your IT help desk cannot do anything about your home domestic Wi-Fi. So you've got some people trying to operate on bandwidth that's almost as slow as 56K dial-up, for those of you who are old enough to remember that. But it's about taking time. It's about explaining to your colleagues why they should be wary of Wi-Fi, why they should be using a VPN, what the importance of updating their software is, not just telling them to do it. It's about making them understand and making it real for them, and helping them and showing them that there is a better way. So the ways that I would encapsulate that is, don't be an island. Okay, so if you want another little catchy number to go away, don't be an island, right? Don't be the one who sort of sits there and goes, oh God, another password reset. Oh, another person sent, clicked on a phishing link. Engage with your staff. You're not better than them, worse than them. You're basically the same. You've got different responsibilities, but you're all human beings at the end of the day that are working for an organization to the achievement of its business objectives. Okay, there are very few companies whose strategic objectives are solely couched in cybersecurity terms, but you've got to understand that there's a wider business need, there's a wider business imperative, and you've got to work with people. Yes, that might take longer. Yes, it's not so easy as just, dismissing emails or firing off an email to someone. Take the time. Pain in the short term, likely to be a saving in the long term, because you're going to educate rather than berate the people that you're working with and for. The last thing I want to talk about under collaboration is training. Those of you, any of you who've seen any of my posts before on the subject and conversations I've had before, I'm allergic to the word awareness, because cyber awareness training, you see it everywhere. And what awareness? Well, I'm aware of lots of things, but it doesn't mean I know anything about them. It's not a call to action, right? We've got to move further up the mastery curve if we actually want to see some impact. So your mastery curve starts at ignorance and ends up with Yoda at the other end, okay? And in between, you've got, ignorance, awareness, information, knowledge, mastery, Yoda, okay? That type of thing. You understand the continuum of that. But we've got to move further. Just making people aware and then firing them because they do something wrong. Well, I was aware of cybersecurity, but I didn't know what I was supposed to do about it. So awareness, let's stop talking about awareness. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about learning, and let's work out where people need to be on that mastery curve. Okay. So effectively what we're saying under this collaboration, if I was to sum it up, I'd actually leave the work to Gandhi, because it is be the change you want to see in the world. Okay. That's a very profound statement that's been on countless memes in the last 10, 15 years, but it is so true. The way you behave, the way you work with other people is going to have a knock-on effect. So don't be an island, collaborate with people in other departments, share your knowledge, bring people's overall level of understanding up the curve, and be the change you want to see in the world. So the important facet of that is a lot of that collaboration work also then has to be translated into communications, more so than ever now that we're in a fully remote or a largely remote working world. So a little statistic for you. The average user receives 112 emails a day, of which only 16% are opened at the desktop, and 4 out of 5 emails aren't even ever opened. If an email is personalized to you, that 16% goes up to a whopping 19%. So even with statistics like that, which any marketing person would say that's a bad return on marketing, 112 emails a day, we're still getting 112 emails a day. And a lot of people are getting a lot more than 112 emails a day. So if people are only reading 1 in 5 emails out of those 112, why are you sending them? Why are we sending them? Why are we using that channel to communicate? We need to think about updating internal communication systems. Now, this one isn't something that's a behavioral thing. This is something to discuss with at an organizational level. But you could kind of couch it in terms of saying, is it time to create some Slack? We're seeing a lot of these productivity tools that are sort of single portal workflows. You can exchange files with each other. You can have instant message conversations. You can store documents, and it's all a one-stop shop. And it saves us having all of these different pockets that we need to add protection to. So again, look systemically, not just at individual behavior, but look at the structures, systems, and architecture of your firm and ask yourself if actually it's contributing to the shortcuts, the workarounds, and the total ignorance of policies and procedures as people get on and do their own thing to get their work done and get away home. Secondly, we see a lot of punitive efforts in cybersecurity. Such and such a person, did you hear about such and such a person? Oh, they lost their job because they clicked on a phishing email and it infected 10 servers. Let's not keep punishing the failures. Let's start flipping that on its head, start rewarding the successes. Okay, let's change the narrative. There's some psychology out there that says if everybody talks about something in a negative sense and this is something that was applied in risk management a while ago. Everyone's talking about risks as negative things. No one was seeing the opportunity of risk taking. And the same thing works here. If everyone's talking about cybersecurity, breaches, damage, reputational issues all the time, and that's the only thing people hear, people will immediately go within themselves and they won't absorb because they're afraid of making a mistake. So change the narrative, flip it on its head, find the positive examples, find where people took steps, made changes that tangibly improve things, and start it's not to say don't talk about the negative stuff, but just think about the balance between the positive and the negative and ask yourself, what's your balance? Is it getting closer to 50-50 or is it still 100% negative and 0% positive? So again, something to think about. Next thing on communication, and this is a really key one that I learned many years ago. Perception trumps intention. Now, this is for some people a really difficult one. It's particularly difficult when you're having a conversation with either another person or a team where there is a learning gradient, a steep learning gradient, i.e., you're the person that knows, that has high knowledge, high expertise, and you're explaining something to a group of people who have a low level of knowledge or expertise. So you're saying your stuff to you've boiled this stuff down to the real basics, but to them they're still hearing it. It's highly complex, jargon-filled noise. So you're getting frustrated because you're saying, I told you to press Control-Alt-Delete. They're hearing something else. And if you keep getting frustrated that if you're communicating and that your audience isn't understanding you, is it their fault or yours? And it's a really tough one to do because we all think we're brilliant at communicating. Other people, might have a different opinion. So it's really important to look yourself in the mirror on this one and say, do you know what? If people aren't understanding me when I say this thing for the 15th time, maybe I shouldn't keep saying it the same way 15 times and expecting a different result, because after all, that's the definition of insanity. Okay, so just think about that. Think about in your communication style. So again, we're going back here less to a behavioral thing and more to a structural systemic thing about those learning modalities. So there's a VARC model, which is a series of learning modalities. So some people are visual learners. So watching TV, watching videos, they'll absorb information better that way. Some people are auditory. If the information is spoken out loud, even if it's being read from a sheet, they'll take it in. Others are better at reading it. Some people need to make notes, and so they write whatever it is that they're hearing through another means. And others are kinesthetic, which means they're practical hands-on learners. So instead of reading a book about how to fix computers, they'd actually need to be sat there, fingers on the keyboard, and actually going through the steps. We're not clones, okay? We're not all the same. What works for me doesn't work for you. What works for you doesn't work for the person next to you. So you've got to think about in your communication, and particularly in your training materials, I'd really encourage you to think about the style and the medium that you're using, okay? So clearly, again, going back to marketing, because do you know what? Quite a lot of what we're talking about in education is also marketing. Let's use a combination. Let's not just write a policy and issue it. Let's write a policy, make someone do a video about it, have a picture of the policy for someone else, or some excerpts of the policy, have a little audio clip going through people's things. So just drip those things in, little and often, in different media, in exactly the same way as, you'll have seen the West Point guys, and I can't erase their Halloween week series of media, but it sticks in my head. Those terrible jokes, the harsh treatment of one of their employees, it sticks in the head because it got delivered through a variety of media so it's effective. It doesn't always have to be serious. It doesn't always have to be boring and dry. So have a think about that. Have a think about how you can make it easier for other people to understand. And that sort of brings us on to, you know, some of that. We've all sat through, you know, and I'm conscious of time here, and I'm not going to keep talking for very much longer, because, you know, sitting on droning for an hour and a half about this, you know, most people by the 90th minute will have gone. Okay, whether they're physically still sitting here, that they will have switched off and they won't be listening anymore. So, you know, who enjoys going into work in January and seeing that you have 16 compliance training courses to complete and you have 3 weeks to do it, and you know you've got to sit there clicking through the same old stuff that's not applicable to your job, and it's going to take you 3 hours, and of course you've got to do it in your evening because you've got too many other things to do, right? This is the 21st century. Let's align with social media, let's align with productivity tools, and let's drip feed the knowledge into people's work feeds rather than issuing a 50-page policy document and telling everyone they've got to read it and attest to have read it. Right? And that's true of cybersecurity policies as well, you know, massive. So it's about behavioral nudges. Put things in places where, in the spam folder, get it to do a pop-up that says something. Oh, have you thought about this? You know, just try different things and think about how you can break those big chunks of learning down into little statements, little daily notices. Stick a set of text on a picture and send it round. Use a bit of humor. You know, I know Ian Murphy's, you know, it's making a whole industry out of taking some of this stuff, using humor to get the message across. And it's very effective because it's different. So be different and use those things. So we've talked about the collaboration, and some of those things are things that you can do, and some of them are things that you will need to do on an organizational level. We've talked about thinking about how you communicate, whether that's in writing, whether it's in video, whether it's talking to people face-to-face on a helpline, or remoting onto someone's machine. You know, there's all sorts of different ways in which we connect with our colleagues now. And some of our colleagues are more starved of contact than others. You know, there's people that are sitting there living on their own. They're probably more than happy to talk to the IT help desk for the first time in their life, you know, because it's the first person they've talked to this week, right? So use those opportunities to see what you can get out of it, to see what you can give them to get out of that contact. Don't just be sitting, right, I'm going to reset your password, off you go. Just make a bit more of it, make a bit more effort. Believe me, those things will come back in spades in the form of cooperation. So, you know, there's a great definition by Sash and Flechet from 2005 from their book Usable Security, What is it and how do we get it? And it really resonated with me. Cyber inoculation. You know, probably very pertinent at the moment where people are talking about vaccines, but we need to inoculate people about cybersecurity, not just make them aware. Okay, and that might be one jab now, one jab in 12 weeks time. It might be little and often getting those pieces in. And what you've got to do, there's a bit of propaganda in there, there's a bit of brainwashing, but overall you've got to have a repeated campaign. I think in direct marketing, something like you've got to send the same, you know, all that junk that comes through your letterbox. You've got to send the same direct marketing message, I think something like 10 times before you get 20% uptake on it. You know, so this isn't just, well, we told you, we issued a policy, we ran through the training, even though that was 11 months ago. So why did you make this mistake today? Right? That's not the way to do it going forward. We've got to keep those messages going, keep those conversations going, and it's got to be reflected in the culture. There's no point if the cybersecurity guys are taking all the shortcuts, you know, using a load of workarounds, bitching and moaning about, you know, what everyone else is doing in the organization. You know, if they're not actually living by your own standards, that culture has to go from boardroom to post room. Okay, everyone's behavior has to be the same. We can't have oh, the sales team, they don't worry about doing cybersecurity. They don't worry about data privacy. They don't worry about data protection because they've just got to get business through the door. That sort of stuff, that sort of legacy culture has to change. And that culture is only going to change from behavioral change, which is actually what we're trying to achieve here through our little formula of collaboration plus communication equals cooperation. That's cyber inoculation, development of the culture, and those behavioral changes to improve your defenses. And if we improve the defenses, both from the technical work that we're already focusing on, and also by factoring in the human element, we should end up with lower breaches or fewer breaches, lower costs, happier cyber teams. So there you have it. There's my little pitch today for collaboration and communication equals cooperation. Happy to take any questions if there are. Didn't use any slides today, but I have put together a little one-pager handout, aid memoir, which the guys can send round to people just to take away and act as a little reminder of what I've talked about today, and we can go from there.
So thanks very much, Paul. Really, really interesting talk for me, especially. A lot of good points made there, and it did feel very much like you were a human talking to humans there, and the collaboration and the communication. It's funny, some of the points that you made there have actually been in my sales training in years past about the different styles of communication, the audio, visual, the logical, the emotional, the different types of communication. I still haven't worked out what type of communication I'm receptive to, but I'm sure my wife knows.
That's one of the tricks, because what you've hit the nail on the head there, because you said it's something you took from sales training.
Yeah.
And this is the whole point is, you see it all the time. You see it in hiring. I only want to look at people with an insurance background. Well, if you only fish in a very small pool, you're only going to get the same type of opinions. Why not bring someone in from manufacturing? Because they've seen risk from a totally different perspective. They've seen cybersecurity risks in a pharma firm, could work in a financial services firm. We need now to solve these bigger problems without reinventing the wheel. So the way we do that is we cheat and we copy and we leverage what other people have learned. And whether they're in fashion, whether they're in social media, whether they're in anything, open your eyes, lift your horizon and take your learning opportunities from wherever they come, not just, oh, well, this is my channel and this is all I'll listen to.
Agreed. Yeah, it sounds like we need to be more enterprising in where we take enterprising in that we should take the best from everything, everything that we see. And it sort of reminds me of another webinar we had about diversity and inclusion, because, seeing different people's points of views, not just from cultures or from, male and female background, different ways of thinking, but it can be attributed to things like sector, or educational background, or even social background. You can learn a lot from all angles, and I love that, to be quite honest with you. I really, really enjoyed that today.
100%. I mean, your diversity point is true. Again, the headlines go to the cultural, the socio-economic, the religious backgrounds, or whatever, and that type of diversity. But the biggest single thing to think about is cognitive diversity, right? And if you chase cognitive diversity, that diversity of thought, well, that's probably going to deliver the rest of your diversity and inclusion needs, because in order to get those different thoughts, but you're actually saying, you've got good thoughts, come to the table, rather than saying, oh, you fulfill this bracket, this criteria, therefore you get a seat, even if you've got nothing to say. And I think that's a much more inclusive way of looking at diversity, is if we get the cognitive diversity right, the rest of it should take care of itself. And that's not a very popular or well spoken about element of diversity and inclusion, but I think it's really critical to success.
Yeah, most definitely, I'd agree with that as well. So like I said, there was a lot of interesting points. One you made very early on, I didn't realize you were a fan of The Mandalorian. And I'm not sure if you let out some spoilers for anybody who's not watched it.
It's pretty long enough after it's come out now that
Yeah,
people.
the last two episodes were highly emotional for me, put it that way. I'm really looking forward to the third season. So yeah, enjoy
Whole
your
year.
So just to remind everybody, we are open to questions. Please
Yeah,
join the debate. There are a few questions already. So I'll just kick off with one that I've got here. So there are many areas of vulnerability in cybersecurity. How can you say that this is the biggest weakness?
Yeah, I think I'm going to blame you guys for part of this.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. But it was one of those. It's one of the things that this actually got picked up in some of the promo posts about this talk today, and as always happens in the cyber world, immediately that you guys posted about it, someone came on and said, "Well, I disagree. He's wrong. This isn't the biggest mistake. It's this." And it's like, yeah, do you know what? It might not be in normal terms the biggest, the biggest area of risk. I'm not saying you can throw away all of your applications and your solutions and your protections. What I'm saying is everyone's been focusing on these things and they're not doing enough of a job. So we need to add something else in. So we need to think about differently. So for me, it's the biggest thing that's not already heavily being focused on. So there's just a slight caveat to that. It's not necessarily the single biggest thing, although, there are arguments that, your humans are the assets. There's lots of things about AI getting it wrong. They are a pretty critical area, but it's just not an area that's necessarily been given as much attention and talk time as necessary.
Certainly. So we've got another question here from, it's no name on there. The question is, there are still many businesses that do not want or feel they should invest in cyber on any level. What has been your approach when speaking to businesses who are reluctant to move forward?
It's getting easier every day, to be honest. You can pick up a newspaper or go online to a newspaper, and you don't have to look too far back through the back issues to find a very high profile ransomware issue. You don't have to look too far to find phishing, data losses, breaches. Reports are being left on the train seat, late on a Friday night for donkey's years. So, my approach is partly evidence-based, right? And if your evidence is compelling and your evidence is recent, right? So this is bang up to date. So this is in the last week, the last month, there are these 5 things that have happened. That's a very compelling thing. Second thing I do is I link it back to board responsibilities under corporate governance and remind them that they are accountable, right? And this is what gives them the squeaky bum time that makes them then actually think about, are they executing their responsibilities? So whether you're a C-suite manager, or you're a board member, or even if your budgets are done at a slightly lower level, those messages can still all roll up when you appeal for budget and buy-in. That you link it back to what's in it for them, and what's in it for them is no jail time, effectively, and the ongoing sustainability of your company as a corporate entity. And again, plenty of examples of firms that have gone out of business. You've got firms now that are like Security Scorecard, who are starting to do cybersecurity ratings on companies, right? So if roll that forward and they foresee in about, or it was perhaps Gartner or somebody, that by 2022, something like 60% of organizations will be using their cybersecurity rating in their marketing material. Okay, so if you're engaging with third parties, either as a vendor or as a buyer, Other people are going to start looking at, are you taking cybersecurity seriously enough? Because they've got the responsibilities in their shop to make sure that what you're doing on their behalf is at the same standard as they've got. So really, it's a question of appeal to them. And again, put yourself in their shoes. What's in it for them? Yes, it's a big number. You can, if you can't get the money, you can still do the behavioral things, right? Because that's stuff you can do today. You don't need a budget for that. You don't need a tool. You don't need a solution.
Yeah.
That will reduce your reliance on needing those big budgets, but ultimately use evidence, appeal to their fears and their obligations. And again, communicate it in a language that they will understand. Keep it simple, keep it relevant, link it back to the business strategic objectives. And if you're still going wrong, set your CV out there, because that company's not going to be around for much longer.
I find that, to get a company to buy into this, obviously, we're talking about the sort of delivery of this, the collaboration and communication. But I think, if I'm allowed to have my take on that question as well, I'd say influencing people to take something seriously, in the corporate world is, I see it's three things when it comes to cybersecurity. Well, number one, is it going to make the organization any money? Because that would be a great motivator. Is it going to save the company any money? Because that would be another great motivator. A penny saved is a penny earned, right? And the other thing would be regulatory compliance. Are they obliged to do this? Which unfortunately, as you and I both know, Paul, this sometimes becomes a tick box exercise. Are we doing this? We're doing this, yes, and it's not really done to any great degree. But I think something like the cybersecurity scorecard that you mentioned there, which I've not actually heard of before, so I'll definitely look into that. Maybe I'm a bit behind the curve on that, but I mean that could change the game a little bit, because then businesses are being, are pitching based upon, the pitching for business maybe, or something.
Absolutely. And these aren't, this isn't Standard & Poor's. This isn't where you go and pay the rating agency to give you a rating, right? This is all, it's all OSINT. It's all open source intelligence that they use to create these ratings. So these ratings are created without your knowledge. But your supply chain could well be choosing not to do business with you because of a security rating that already exists based on information you've got in the public domain about your answers. So I think, as we move forward, the digital evolution is percolating through every facet. So just because you're not in a security industry, just because you're not in financial services or pharma or food, and you're not those heavily regulated, everyone's affected by GDPR. Sure. So everyone's got cybersecurity on there. All regulation, all just English law, is codifying this stuff. And if you get it wrong, there's accountability.
Yeah, cool. So we've got another question from Tony this time. Do you think that there is an element of blissful ignorance, even with the risk of ICO intervention?
Yes, 100%. And that's why I made the point about, last year, the ICO, their fines range from 48 euros, which is, I mean, like for not submitting your details on the site, all the way to 35 million euros. And that's the first time we've seen that, because up until that point, there's a number of firms I've worked with who are like, oh yeah, we did like you said, we did the tick box stuff. We've got the privacy statement. We've done this. That's us done. Well, no, it's not. There's so much more to do, but you might only find out quite how much you've got to do when you get a breach. Let's just see what Tony said.
Oh, he's added to that question.
So yes, there's still blissful ignorance. I think it's going to take, the increased action by people like the ICO, and more, and in regulated industries, action by regulators is going to drive some of that ignorance out. Why do we need to spend this money? We haven't got a problem.
I think he's put that in the context of maybe a business owner.
And I think it is one of those things that's hopefully, Tony, that's a legacy opinion, that as more data becomes available on fines and the accountability, that's going to become less and less of a problem. But there is always going to be that, again, it's human weakness. It's not going to happen to me, right? COVID, getting run over by a bus, losing your job, failing on your mortgage. None of these things are ever going to happen to me, you know, and it's human nature to think like that. But when we've got the responsibility of an organization on our desk, not just our personal lives, we've got to take that just as seriously. And we can't, you know, that's not a defense you could have in court, right? Well, we didn't think it was going to happen to us.
Just to interject there, so I think my personal experience with the ICO, I find them to be really helpful, to be quite honest with you.
Yep.
I don't think they're out there as the big policeman with a baton getting ready to strike you as soon as you've done anything wrong. I think they're genuinely very, very helpful. I've used their live chat functions. I've used their phone support. I've read their resources. We've had external consultants come in and try and decipher, you know, what the laws are and how they are applicable to us and other businesses as well. Obviously, being in the cyber remit, you know, it's important to know that. It's my job to kind of know that kind of thing. But one thing they do to help organizations out is a free voluntary audit. You know, people seem to get scared of inviting people into audit, but, you know, it's there to help you and help your organization. And it's actually free.
Stop you there. Yeah. What have you just said? The ICO is collaborating with you. They're giving you good phone line, free materials, great when you email them. So their communication is on point. They're going the extra mile. They're not just punishing you. They're not berating you. They're working with you. And what do they get? Your cooperation.
Exactly.
And that is a great example of exactly what I'm talking about here. Is yes, anyone who tries to phone up corporation tax or self-assessment or the benefits office, how much value do you get from that? Computer says no, right? That's what you get. ICO have worked out that if they're a bit more human and a bit nicer to people, and they work with people to help understand what is quite a complex process there's lots of different facets of it when you first go onto their site, but they've got a lot of decision trees. They've got videos if you want to look at those videos rather than use the decision trees. But they've worked this out. It's a perfect example of how to get what you want. What they want is people to follow the rules. But instead of using a stick, they're using a carrot. But at the same time, they're using a stick for those who say, oh, well, they're a bunch of nice guys. They won't ever penalize us, so we won't bother. So it's about getting that balance right. And I think they're succeeding at the moment. We'll see how it goes further down the line.
Yeah, so there are some more questions. There's one I've skipped over. I'm very sorry, there's not a name attached to this one. I think it might be a yes or no answer, and we may have already covered it in one of your previous questions, but management behavior also leads to human mistakes. Is this true?
One word answer, yes. Slightly longer answer, massively. I talked about culture and I talked about behavior. And although we're now in a world of influencers who can come from all over the place and ambassadors, tone from the top still matters, okay? So the way your leadership team treat this is going to have a steering influence on your culture and ultimately on behaviors. And it is a do as I say and as I do that needs to operate. So quite often management are at fault. And I noticed in some of the chat, someone was saying, if you can influence your more mature staff to understand why they need to change the way they operate and comply to policies, you've achieved one of your training objectives through diversity. Yes, particularly you can link that back to that management piece, because typically in a lot of organizations, again, entrepreneurs, startups, it's a little bit different, but a lot of those management teams are older digital migrants, they're not digital natives still, who don't generally, or to a larger extent, are less familiar and are less comfortable with this as a topic than the sort of, 20s and teens guys coming into the market who've grown up in a world where there's always been tech.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Got a question from Sid. You mentioned the rating. Does an organization have to have a certain rating to pass or prove that they have the required standard?
So I don't want to do a big sales pitch for a firm that I'm not working with, but essentially it's a bit like any other thing. You get a rating, you get a score. It works very much in the same way as your personal credit score. It's then down to the business that you want to do business with to take a view on whether for that arrangement or that business, your score represents a risk to them or not. Right, so it's not necessarily a pass or fail. Again, that taking on those collaboration and communication elements, you can use those ratings. They will actually tell you where some of your vulnerabilities are from an open source perspective. And again, it's perception, not intention. So even if you've done something, if in the marketplace someone who's doing an open source search sees it a different way, you've still got a gap to fill. So you can actually use those ratings to help tell you where you need to improve, in the same way as you don't get CCJs and you don't miss your mortgage payments and other things that can damage your rating. And over time, you can work to improve it. But I just think we're going to get more quantification of cybersecurity, and it's going to have more influence on purchasing decisions. When we look at Amazon ratings, we look at Trustpilot ratings, we look at TripAdvisor, this peer review basis of decision making is something that's getting, again, inoculated into our brains. And there's no reason why in the corporate world that's not going to be the same.
I totally agree with you on that last point there. I mean, if I'm buying anything these days, I look at the reviews, I look at them in detail. So I start with the most recent ones. I look at the worst ratings, and
and they're not always accurate. They're not always factually correct. They're not always accurate, and yet we still, if we're presented with two relatively similar products, and one's got a 4.5-star rating and one's got a 2-star rating, human behavior, we're probably going to buy the product that's got the 4.5-star rating.
Yeah.
Whatever the basis of fact is. So, again, I think it's just indicative of the way our personal lives is changing the nature of the way business is done. Yes, it's not going to, just because you've got a cybersecurity rating doesn't mean you're not going to do a due diligence exercise, doesn't mean you're not going to go through the whole contractual piece when engaging a third party. But when you're looking for a new solution, a company I worked with recently just wanted a fairly easy expenses system. What do? You go onto the internet and you type in expenses systems and you do a natural shortlist and you get a few, and then you contact them, and then you go from there. But there's at some point of it that is non-scientific, and it's based on marketing, and it's based on human performance and human opinion. You need everything working in your favor to do business these days. So, no stone unturned. It's just other things to think about, that perhaps you weren't before. And if people have taken away something from today that's got that, then I'll be very happy.
Cool. Okay, great. So there is a few more questions. I think they sort of link into what was said previously. So I'll finish off on this one, because it does sort of link into one of the previous questions as an extension, I guess. So shouldn't cybersecurity teams focus on the technical solutions and leave the soft skills to HR and line managers?
Yeah, good one. Two parts to that. One, we've got to stop calling them soft skills, because, well, look at the data, look at the statistics, right? We're still getting the breaches. They're non-technical skills, so it's technical skills and non-technical skills. But when you say technical skills and soft skills, right, that's the bit that everyone doesn't bother with. because they think, oh, yeah, whatever, soft skills. Blah. And it just creates that view of it. Whereas actually, if we say technical skills, non-technical skills, we need both to be operating at a high level of capacity and capability in order to perform work, then yes, absolutely. You know, we need those skills because, again, it doesn't matter how fancy your computer software is. If you don't understand how to switch your computer on, what good is it? If you don't switch the VPN on, or the user doesn't switch the VPN on, they don't use an encrypted email system, they just send it through the normal channels, right? These are all non-technical skills. You know, these are about human behavior. So I think they're crucially important. In terms of leaving them to HR and line managers, again, I bring it back to culture. You know, if you got the type of culture where you go, that's not my job, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
Right. It's everybody's responsibility. What do you want to achieve at the end of the day as a cybersecurity professional? You want fewer breaches, you know, lower operational risk capital, lower operational risk costs, fewer losses, and you want to be able to keep your job by not having something blow up and kill the company. Do you want to let that fall into someone else's hands, or do you want to be responsible for it? To me, at the end of the day, that's the simple question. And if it's someone else's job and someone else's problem, you know, you're not going to win in the long run.
Excellent. So I think we'll close off there. If there are any, I will email across some of the unanswered questions. It's just that we're running out of time on our end as well. And if you want to answer them in your own time, and we'll get that sent out with the recording to all the attendees. And thank you again, everybody, for coming along. We have got another series of talks planned, which we'll communicate to you. So some very interesting speakers on the way. But I think that'll be it from now from me. Thank you again, Paul. I think I've covered everything.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be back in the Cyber Lounge, so thanks.
Brilliant. Great to have you back as well.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers. See you soon.